Hi everyone, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel, and today we are back to discuss the third round of Goodreads reading achievements for the year 2025. If you somehow missed what's going on with Goodreads, you don't use it, you don't care. Goodreads basically has been implementing these Goodreads reading challenges that are different than the normal just how many books you want to read. They've been introducing themed reading challenges that you have to complete in a set amount of time, normally a couple months. Our first set of challenges were the Goodreads community challenges, then we had Goodreads seasonal challenges, which was kind of like a very short interlude, and now we are getting into Goodreads summer reading challenges. So I have already covered the last two challenges. I've had a lot of in-depth thought and analysis that is still evolving and changing as we go, but since I've discussed it a lot, I'm just going to get into a brief kind of synopsis of where my feelings are now, and then we will get into the data, where I will sometimes interject, but hopefully most of it is going to be you coming to your own conclusion based on the data that I've found. Goodreads is a reading/tracking website and app, and it was acquired by Amazon. For a while, Amazon just kind of ignored it, but it's really become a means for Amazon to promote their Kindle and book buying on their website. It is a site that has advertisements on the site, and we can really see that Goodreads is being used not just to sell books, but to market us the idea of buying books from them because of its convenience, because of the website and how it's linked to Amazon. As the years have gone on, especially this year, we can see just how much the site has been integrated with Amazon. They are becoming more and more linked as time goes on. And it's interesting because Goodreads is trying to create this image of a space that is up to date on what is popular and what is trending in the book world. And they are also trying to appear intellectual and highbrow. This is something that is not new to the book world. I feel like this is a very common occurrence. Because you read books, you're seen as intellectual. Because of a lot of awards, more literary leaning books are seen as better, more highbrow than any other type of book. It's not anything new to be seeing it here, but it is just really interesting how Goodreads is trying to balance the idea of being on top of popular trendy stuff and also being on top of like what is highbrow, what is literature, what is good books, what is good writing. With these challenges, while they claim that everything is based on data, there is curation that goes into a lot of these lists, and we can see it because a lot of the lists are very inconsistent across the different challenges, which for me is what really drew me into really thinking about these challenges and figuring them out and analyzing them, just because I was so confused why they were trying to create these lists that seem to go together, and for there to be so much bias and for there to be so much inconsistencies in how these challenges were created. It almost seemed like these challenges were created by a bunch of different people, when in fact it is by two different authors that write these articles, that make these lists, and who, to my knowledge, working in the same office together. So Goodreads has been known to be a popularity contest when it comes to a lot of their lists, especially the Goodreads Choice Award, and we are really seeing a bias towards commercially successful titles as well as towards literary fiction, especially over nonfiction and genre books. Goodreads is a site that is run by Americans, and it's usually used by Americans and English-speaking people, and this fact is reflected in the site and what is popular. Goodreads wants to appear unbiased, it wants to appear as if it's based on facts, but again, that isn't always true because there is curation and there are biases slipping through. That being said, Goodreads is used by a lot of people. It is the premium or most used website for reading and tracking and reviewing. I like to use these lists, this data that they're curating for us, and analyze it because it's basically telling us what Amazon wants us to read, what the greater book market wants us to read, and what our peers are being influenced to read. So in the grand scheme of things, I've gotten a lot of pushback because this, it isn't really that important. Many people ignore these challenges and ignore Goodreads altogether and use their time on other websites. But for me, these things are really interesting. And just because you are not interested in these things and you choose to ignore them, it doesn't mean that people aren't sitting down in an office somewhere discussing us and deciding what appeals to us and how they want to market and curate their site. Whether we want to be marketed to or not, we are being marketed to. So in this breakdown, I really just want to analyze this from a marketing perspective and just kind of look at the trends we're seeing, look at the books we're seeing over and over again. And I just want to use this as a grain of salt way to kind of analyze the greater publishing world and what book publishing and book marketing looks like right now. So let's get into the Goodreads challenges. So for our third round of challenges, we have 9 different goals to complete. We have 3 goals that are kind of throwaway challenges. All 3 are based on how many books you read. So I believe it's if you read 2 books, you get a bookmark. If you read 3, you get a bookmark. If you read 4, you get a bookmark. They're not really based on anything. And so what I want to focus on is the 6 challenges that are based on reading lists. So we have challenge favorites, poolside puzzlers, chart toppers, acclaimed titles, debut darlings, and lightning round. So all 6 of these are based on lists, so you have to complete a book in that time frame. If you completed a book earlier in the year, it doesn't count. You have to complete that book in the time frame. So if you've somehow read all the books on the list, you're out of luck. You just have to change the reading dates or reread a book. So this round of challenges is very interesting because we have chart toppers and challenge favorites, which when we get into, I feel like are very similar. There is some overlap. Debut darlings is another one that has a little bit of overlap in it. And even acclaimed titles has a lot of overlap with these challenges and with other challenges. Spoiler alert, I didn't do it this round, but in the next round of challenges, which will be the end of the year challenges, I am planning on putting everything together and seeing what books they recommend over and over again. You will see books repeat themselves in these lists if you study them like I do over and over and over again. So we have one oddball challenge, which is going to be the lightning round. These are all books that are mostly supposed to be books that are low page count to help you complete your Goodreads challenge, but they also added some longer books on there as well if you are a long book reader. So this challenge is just kind of an oddball. It's just kind of out of nowhere. And again, it's not based on data or anything. It's just a curated list made by Goodreads. So like last month where we had a throwaway challenge like this, I didn't do any research or data collecting on this. So I just skipped it because it really didn't have any bearings on any of the challenges. So let's get into the first challenge that I actually did do research on, which is going to be challenge faves. So this is the 144 most read books of the 2025 reading challenge so far. So this is very similar to the first round of challenges where we had Buzzy Books, which was a collection of the most read books for 2024. So let's read the article that this is all about. It's time once again for our summer status check on the annual reading challenge, in which both avid and casual bookworms pledge to read a certain number of books before the calendar year is out. If you're not already on board, it's easy enough. Click on over to the 2025 reading challenge page, enter the number of books you plan to devour, and then get busy. To get a sense of how things are going so far, we've gathered up the most popular books chosen by Goodreads regulars in this year's reading challenge, sorted by genre. Indeed, each category below lists the top 12 books marked as read by participants. So for instance, Kristen Hanna's The Woman is currently the most read historical fiction book among those taking the 2025 reading challenge. It all makes for some extremely interesting browsing and clicking. The collection below suggests the vast range of books that Goodreads members are reading just now. You'll find Pulitzer Prize winners like Percival Everett's James alongside Margaret Atwood's 1985 classic The Handmaid's Tale. You'll also find a good cross between the Goodreads Choice Awards winners such as Emily Henry's Happy Place and Nita Prose's The Maid and Gabrielle Zevin's Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. Plus international time-traveling classics, high school English class artifacts, scary stories, acclaimed memoirs, and the occasional warning siren. Click on the book's cover for more information about each title and use the Want to Read button to add books to your digital shelf. You can also click the link directly below to add to your Goodreads page, blah, blah, blah. Check out the challenges for special limited time reading achievements throughout the year. So this is the most popular books read by Goodreads members from the last 6 months, and it is broken down into different sections. So we have the top 12 for fiction, the top 12 for historical fiction, mystery thriller, down and down and down. So it is basically exactly the same as the Buzzy challenge. It was very interesting for me specifically because I really wanted to see the overlap and just see how much things have changed. So before we get into that, let's just start with our author stats. For ethnicity, we have 88.9 or almost 89% white authors, and I believe we have a lot more white authors than we previously did. For Buzzy, we had 86.6 white authors, so we have gone up 2%. From there, we have a smattering of different ethnicities: Brazilian, Israeli, Indigenous, African American, Chinese. Going into nationality, we have 74% are American authors. For Buzzy, again, it was 74, so it stayed at least pretty consistent there. And from my chart, you can see which which countries are English speaking. So anything in the light blue is going to be English speaking. So we have American, Irish, Canadian, British. And for our other countries, we have one person from Cyprus, one person that is Japanese, a Belgian author, an Argentinian author, a Korean author, multiple Israeli authors, a Brazilian author, and a Dutch author. So like last time, very English speaking. For gender, we have 72% are women authors, 39 are male, and 1 non-binary. The women authors have gone up significantly from the last round. Getting into queer authors, we have 4.2% are books with queer representation, while 85% is not, which went down significantly where we had 10% of reading for Buzzy. Things have shifted around. We have seen some movement, but let's get into the challenge fave stats. So for these authors, we did have a lot of repeat authors. As you can see from this chart, there are some overrepresented authors, the most notably being Sarah J. Maas. She was not really included on Buzzy books at all. It seemed like she was maybe going on the outs, but no, she's come back with a vengeance. She is represented 7.6% of the reading. She is 11 books, with Frida McFadden taking up 8. And yes, this is based on Goodreads data. They can't technically change this, but we've seen lists where they've curated where they've only decided to pick one book or one book in a series. So why not this time around? I just can't believe there's more people that have not read Sarah J. Maas at this point. She's overwhelming. And Frida McFadden, her popularity surge is crazy. But most authors are really only represented once, with a couple people represented 3 times and a couple people represented 2 times. No one quite meeting Frida McFadden or Sarah J. Maas's levels. For Buzzy books, there was this problem where there were a ton of books that were not represented in the correct category. Mostly we were seeing that in genre fiction, where the category of sci-fi, fantasy, horror, their slots were being filled up with general fiction titles that had some sci-fi, fantasy, or horror elements. For me, that was a big thing because when you go into a bookstore, those books would be categorized as literary fiction. The publisher would categorize them as literary fiction or general fiction. To me, there is this big pushback a lot from the literary fiction community against genre fiction as being not as serious, not as important. It just really irks me when we see genre fiction being taken over by literary fiction titles and just kind of taking over that space. And I just don't feel like it makes for an accurate representation of what people that read genre fiction read. And we saw it again with this challenge. We have 11% of the books, or 17 of the books, are technically categorized in the wrong section. Why is this happening? I think it comes down to Amazon being a book site. They tag everything that they possibly can think of on a book to get it traction in a digital market versus a brick and mortar bookstore where you're only going to see the book in one section for clarity's sake. And so you're seeing books that should technically be literary fiction transferring over into the other genre fiction categories. The biggest one that irks me particularly is The Midnight Lie. I feel like that is definitely a general fiction title with fantasy elements. I personally feel like it has very little crossover with genre fiction readers. And the thing about it that really irks me is if you click on the Midnight Library, it's actually listed as a Goodreads winner for the fiction category. So at one point they knew that The Midnight Library was a fiction title. It won the general fiction category for Goodreads, but they're still putting it in fantasy. And if you want more of my opinions on the crossover of genre fiction and fiction titles and why I think it's so important, I recently put out a video that I discussed and analyzed booktuber reading statistics. So I went in, I found 50 videos of people recommending books, and I analyzed that data. And as a fun bonus, I actually used my statistics and compared it to the Buzzy and the challenge favorites top 12 books for fantasy, sci-fi, and romantasy. Romantasy is pretty spot on. It's a really big crossover, so we know that genre is actually represented by romantasy fans in the Goodreads space. But with sci-fi and fantasy, there was a big difference. The books that Goodreads are saying the most popular with readers are not the most popular among fantasy and sci-fi fans. And that's what I mean. That's why it's important that we actually use accurate genre categories. It's just not an accurate representation of what sci-fi fantasy fans are actually reading. Getting into pub date, this was something that I added this time around just because I wanted to see how much is being published in 2024, 2025, and what is older titles that have remained popular. So for books published in 2025, we have 14, and 2024 with 32. This is the biggest section. So most books that are gaining traction, remaining popular are going to be books from 2024. In the purple, you can see all the books that were published in the last 5 years. So from 2020 onward, this is the next biggest section of books. So 2019, we have 7 books, another 7 for 2020, another 6 for 2021, 15 for 2022, and 20 for 2023. And then from there, we can just see the popularity of publication date diminish. So for blue, we have 2011 with 2, 2015 with 4, 2016 with 5, 2017 with 7, and 2018 with 9. With the green, we have all the books published from 2000 to 2010. So altogether, 7 books were published between those years. In the yellow, we have books that were published in the 90s, and then we have 2 books that were published before the 1990s. So yes, the popular books are the ones that are recently published in the last 5 years for the most part. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff, the stuff I added this time around, and that's where I compared the challenge favorites to the Buzzy Books Challenge. I wanted to see how many books repeated. So how many books were on that list that we saw again in this list. So from Buzzy into the challenge faves, 43% of the books were repeats. So we saw them in Buzzy, we're seeing them again. Not quite the majority, but a lot of repeats. And then from there, I broke it down further. I made another chart because I wanted to see if the books moved around a lot. Okay, so you can see we have 2 colors on this chart. We have blue and we have pink. For the pink, in the dark color, we have books that were added. So these are the 43 new books. So with the light pink, we have a N, which represent new books. So these are all the books that were published in 2025. So they couldn't be on the list for 2024 because they were new added books. Our smallest section of books, 6 books, stayed the same. They held their place. They remained popular. For our next biggest section, we had 17 books that went up, so they became more popular. This could be because it was a new book and was gaining traction. It could be because it gained sudden popularity or a surge in readers. For whatever reason, we have 13% of books that went up, but the biggest section of books are the ones that are coming down the list. So there is a possibility they could rise up again. We could see them move up the list, but for a lot of these titles, especially nonfiction, there is a lifespan of a book, and as they get further and further away from their publication date, their readership goes down and other books take their place. It's more than likely that that's what will happen to a lot of books. We saw a lot of books that were not repeated. Those are the books that are rising the ranks, that are moving on upward and replacing these old books. So yes, even your favorite book, even the most popular book, it won't always necessarily remain on top. It will slowly get replaced by other titles, which is a natural thing to happen. Like I said, I'm not doing it this time around. I'm gonna include it at the end of the year, but going through these lists, especially like this list, it was very challenging because there were just so many books I was not interested in, so many books that I've seen repeated over and over again, so many books that I've already read. Always makes me question of who these lists are for, because the general reader, if they're trying to complete all of these challenges, it might be actually very difficult for them to complete 6 books in a year, or to complete 6 books in a couple months. Most people don't read more than 1 book a year, if that. For a general reader where these books are something they're interested in and haven't previously read these books, this actually might be kind of a struggle for a lot of us that are really inundated in these lists and reading and have been reading for a really long time and have been reading a lot of books. A lot of these titles are not going to interest us. We've already read them. So for this challenge, I decided to pick up I Who Have Never Known Men. It ended up being the most popular science fiction book, so it rose the ranks quite a lot. It's been in discussion. It is an older dystopian title. I don't know if it just recently got translated or it's just gaining traction because of the rise of dystopian as we watch the world turn into a dystopian. I read it. I thought it was fine. I definitely think it is a literary fiction and reads like a literary fiction book. So this time around, at least for this challenge, I did try to read something that was in the most popular category to really gain an insight on what general fiction readers are reading, non-inundated are reading. Because in a lot of ways, these lists are kind of for the locals, as in they're for, you know, your coworker at work that reads a couple books a year, that is not really vastly interested or connected to book social media in the greater book world. Therefore, your mom who picks up a random book on the holidays by recommendations of either the market or her friends. In a lot of ways, this is the best list to look at if you just want a general consensus of what just normal everyday people are reading. Because I'm not going to contest that this list isn't the popular titles. It very much is. It's what people are reading. I don't think there's really a bias here. year, besides maybe not doing a little bit more curation with the author amounts that they pick. I don't know who's going to actually care about these lists, who's going to be going through them and analyzing them unless they are actually very interested in this stuff. So there seems to be a little bit of conflict for who these lists are actually made for and who's actually going to be looking and thinking about the list. So we're going to continue sequentially, and we're going to cover Poolside Puzzles, which was the next challenge, and you collect this challenge by completing one of the Beachy Read mystery thrillers. So this is a continuation of some of the other list styles that we've seen. At the beginning of this challenge, if you had asked me what kind of challenges we were going to see included, I thought it would be challenges that talked about what books were popular among readers, like Buzzy, like the challenge favorites, and I thought it would be books that dealt with the most popular books from each genre. We've covered fantasy, we've covered historical fiction. I don't think we've technically covered general fiction, but this time around we're doing mystery thrillers, and this is readers' 75 most popular mystery thriller challenges of the past 3 years. So we see a return to the genre challenge criteria that we've seen of the past. So the 3 years, the most popular books of a chosen genre. The biggest difference is that it's 75 books. In the past, we've seen a lot more books included, closer to 100 or more. So it seems really interesting to me that we are downsizing these challenges. Actually, a lot of these lists are a lot less books than we've seen in previous lists. So that is one thing to know and very interesting to me. So let's kind of read the article. For devoted fans of mystery novels, the popularity of the genre can be a double-edged sword. There are certainly plenty of books to choose from looking for a new mystery or thriller, but the sheer volume of titles released each year can be overwhelming. One reliable way to generate good leads is to check out what your fellow Goodreads members have been reading. This collection is just that, a virtual shelf of the 75 most popular mystery thriller books published in the last 3 years, according to Goodreads regulars currently read and want to read shelves. As a added bonus, all of these books have at least a 3.5 average star rating from your fellow readers. This is something that we've seen before, so it's nice to see it implemented again. So there is some curation, but we've also talked about how the curation can be a double-edged sword because who regularly gets reviewed bombed and gets reviewed more harshly? Books by African American authors, books by BIPOC people in general. Author-wise, you'll find plenty of books from the usual suspects in this collection: Lucy Foyle, Frida McFadden, Stacey Willingham, and Riley Sager. If you got a particular subgenre in mind, watch for specialists like Ruth Ware, Old School Whodunits, C.A. Crosby, The Southern Noir, or Jesse Sutanato for cozy mysteries. Click around carefully and you might find a universally beloved country music legend. Bonus pick, Christine Perez, How to Solve Your Own Murder. You'll only need it once, but you'll be glad you have it handy. Click the book cover image for more information about each title, and feel free to add what you want to read button to any potential books you've sluiced out for yourself. So like I said, this is a smaller list than we've seen in the past. It seems like they're trying to make it easier to pick books for people, but that also can be limiting. So let's kind of go through the stats for this. So the majority of books are by white authors. It's 90%. This is something I've struggled with as somebody that's not interested in mystery thriller. I'm really only interested in a book if it has a BIPOC book that seems really fascinating or intriguing, or if it has an LGBT book. And so for me going through this list, there just weren't a lot of choices to pick from. The reason why I would pick a BIPOC book is because I feel like it has an interesting perspective on a genre I just otherwise am not really interested in. And so again, if you're going in it like me, where you are looking for that, there is a limitation here. So we have one author that was unknown, one author that was Indonesian Singaporean, one author that was Filipino, one author that was Korean, one author that was Sri Lankan, one African American author, and one Hong Kong author. I know that this is just a bigger issue in mystery thriller publishing, that it kind of looks like that. I can see why it would be very frustrating as somebody that wants to read an African American mystery thriller because they are African American and they only have one choice. If you're reading African American thrillers, you probably have already read it. But going into nationality, you can see by this purple color which books were written by people from English-speaking countries. So we have 53 or 40 books that were American, 18 or 24% British, 7 or 9% were Canadian, 4 books were Australian, and 2 Irish. And then we have 1 Korean, 1 Indonesian Singaporean, 1 that was unknown, and then 1 French. And so again, we're seeing this larger issue of it being so American focused. It's an American app. run by Americans, run by an American company. We know it has problems. And in my last video where I discussed booktubers and what booktubers are recommending, I had a lot of people giving their perspective on stuff with this. And we know it's just a bigger problem in the greater world. We're not putting our time and resources into translation, especially translating genre fiction. If something's going to be translated, it's going to be a literary novel, especially because there's just so many authors that are willing to write in English, and we have a plethora of English-speaking authors, native English-speaking authors that write in English. So it's a bigger thing in the publishing world, and it also raises the question of if you want to read something in a different language, maybe it's on you to start learning a different language, because most countries in Europe, Asia, they learn more than one language. It's very much an American thing that we only know English. So that's just another perspective to bring into this. I would still like to see more translated works, more works from other countries, but there are bigger things at play here, especially where publishing is concerned. There were no queer books, but going into gender, there was 81% women authors, 17% male authors, and there was one book that was technically written by a man and a woman, although I don't think either person actually wrote the book, which would be Dolly Parton and James Patterson. That one was definitely written by a ghostwriter. But let's get into the authors, because I did break it down, because I wanted to see how many authors were repeating. Like our challenge favorites, yes, Frida McFadden, she is here overrepresented with 8 books. This is very interesting to me because, again, they are making the list smaller. They are allowing less books on it, but previously, for the epic and the historical stuff, they limited authors to 1 book per series. I thought they should have gone farther and only included 1 book per author, but we've gone back to not having any curation at all. So that's an interesting change. So that allows 8 Frida McFadden books on here. Other authors you see multiple times are going to be Riley Sager with 3, Gillian McAllister with 3, Ruth Ware with 3, Alison Feenley with 3, and Rachel Hawkins with 3. And then a couple other authors that had 2 books. Majority had 1 book, but Frida McFadden with 10% of the books, that's kind of crazy. So with the limited books, with it being really based on popularity, that's where me as a library patron really struggles. And this is what, I don't think it's technically maliciously intended, but when you're choosing the most popular books, you kind of have to go and buy the book in most cases. It is very difficult to get your hands on a new title very quickly from the library, or even sometimes available as an audiobook or ebook, because it might not have been made yet. And so this is where the connection to Amazon really gets interesting to me, because we are getting marketed, we are getting pushed big popular books, new books over and over again, and those books are harder to access. And so maybe you will turn to your Kindle Unlimited subscription and choose that book. Maybe you will turn to Amazon and buy that book, turn to Barnes & Noble and buy that book if you wanted to complete this challenge. I really struggled. I was looking up every book that I was mildly interested in, and nothing was available in the library. I eventually just had to go through the list and pick the book that was available through the library. And that's how I ended up picking, quite randomly, Bright Young Woman by Jessica Knoll, because it was pretty much my only option through the library. This ended up being like a 2.75 star for me, 2.5 star. I think I rounded it up to a 3, but it's like really middle of the road book for me. This is basically a reimagining, I would say, of the Ted Bundy cases, and we are following a couple different women as they interact with this case and the capture of this man. It reads almost like a documentary. As a non-mystery thriller person, that was an appeal to me. A lot of people have taken issues with this book because of the relation to Ted Bundy. This book had the added bonus of having a lesbian character that was a pretty prominent character, which Goodreads did not disclose as a tag for this book, but apparently in her next book there is a lot of homophobia and just a lot of other weird stuff going on. I didn't see any problems in this book, particularly from that angle. There were definitely some weird words I remember in the beginning section that I was like, okay, that's an odd word. I don't know if I would recommend this to mystery thriller fans. Not sure I'd recommend it to general fiction fans either. And let's just say I'm glad I was able to source a book from the library and didn't have to pay for it before I knew really what I was getting into. So next we're going to go over chart toppers. This was the 3rd challenge released, and you collect this achievement by completing one of these hit new books from the first half of the year. So this is the one I was particularly getting confused with Buzzy or with the challenge favorites, but these are all new releases. So the most popular books that people have been reading that are 2025 releases versus the books that were just the most popular with readers regardless of the date they were published. So let's get into the article. Believe it or not, it's time once again for our annual mid-year assessment assessment of year's most popular books so far, according to Goodreads members. As always, these selections are based on the total number of reader reviews and which titles are making their way members read and want to read shelves. Below, we've sorted out the top new books of 2025 in each of the usual categories in order of popularity. So for instance, Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey currently holds the overall top spot in contemporary fiction. Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor is the most popular book of the year so far for science fiction, categorized as a fiction novel, and I've seen a lot of people say that it doesn't have a lot of sci-fi elements, so that's interesting. We followed the same route for our usual genre suspects. This can be an interesting way to see which new books, topics, and themes are resonating with Goodreads' omnivorous reading community. We've got multi-general family sagas, aquatic romances, snowbound thrillers, grimdark fantasy, historical fiction, Jane Austen updates, and the occasional MacArthur genius, and even some rather comprehensive gossip. Click around below to see what's what, and you can see the want to read button to add any interesting leads to your digital shelf. So again, this is very similar to Buzzy and the Challenge Faves because it's based on the top books of the genre. It's just based on the 2025 releases. So it's split up into genre, but it's a little bit different than Challenge Faves because it is not necessarily the same amount of books. But when we get into the genre categories and fantasy, they limit them to 4. And also, like I said, there was some weird stuff happening where they were putting general fiction books in the genre categories once again. So from my count, there were 8 books that were fiction, 5 books that were historical fiction, and you can see this with the light green color. Historical fiction is in the fiction category section of the bookstore, so I put these together so you can kind of see like a fourth of the reading is fiction titles. So even though they were putting a lot of fiction books in the genre fiction categories, there is still a big chunk of genre fiction. We had 5 romances, 4 mystery thrillers, 4 fantasies, 4 romantasy, 4 horror, and then 1 sci-fi, because 3 of those sci-fis were technically general fiction titles with sci-fi elements to them. We had 4 books that were young adult in the dark green, and then another quarter of the books in this mid green color are going to be our non-fiction titles. So 4 memoirs, 4 historical biographies, and 4 general non-fiction. To get into author ethnicity, we have 80% are white, so we're seeing a lot of different authors represented. We have a Nigerian author, a Vietnamese author, 3 African American authors, 1 Lebanese author, 1 Moroccan, 1 indigenous, 1 Japanese, 1 Japanese Chinese American, and 1 Egyptian. So we're seeing a little bit more difference there. And then for nationality, with the mid pink color, this is all of the native English speaking countries. So 70% is American, 2 are Canadian, 2 Australian, and 6 British. And then we have 1 Egyptian, 1 Moroccan, 1 Nigerian, 1 Vietnamese, and then 1 Swedish with the light pink. We have a majority of women authors again, with 70% of reading, and then 30% or 15 books with male authors. For queerness, we are seeing 5 books, or almost 10% of the reading is going to be queer themes or LGBT characters, and then 90% does not have any queer representation based on Goodreads tags. So this is really interesting because if these titles remain popular, we are going to see some adjustments, some differences if we see a roundup of the most popular books in 2025, but most of these have not broken on to the challenge favorites list. There is some overlap again, but a lot of these are still gaining traction, like the mystery thrillers, like the challenge favorites. When you have a lot of popular books, when you have especially new books, that's when you're going to have a very big challenge to try and source a book, especially through the library, to complete this challenge in a timely manner. So I basically had to go with a book that was available at the library. It was not my first choice book, but it is something that I've been interested in. So I read Oathbound by Tracy Dion. This is a young adult fantasy, urban fantasy. It's set in our world fantasy. This is the 3rd book in a series, so not accessible if you haven't read the series. And there were a lot of books like that were a part of series, especially like last books in series. And like I said, it wasn't my first choice because it is very, very long. It is a 25-hour audiobook, and I'm sure it's like a 700 or 800 page book. It's a big chunker, but again, I had it on my library app and I saw it was available and I knew it was on this list, so I kind of just had to reserve the copy and read it. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's a very fun series, but I personally have probably grown out of the series as a 30-year-old woman, which there's nothing wrong with. I'm going to continue to read the series because there's just one last book and I'm a completionist, but I'm glad I got to read it through the library and experience it through an audiobook, because I don't know if I would have been able to sit down with a like 700 page chunker and physically read it, because that's just not something my brain is physically able to do right now without a lot of trial. Now let's get into the acclaimed titles. So like the lightning round, this is kind of like a throwaway thing. It's just something that Goodreads created. It's not a genre book. It's not based on a celebration month. It's not based on popular titles. It's simply like a curated list of books that have gotten awards. And this list is very odd. So people already have problems with like these lists of like most important books. What's interesting is that a lot of times it seems to be books that are just like out of nowhere that nobody's heard of, or they're just like very, very popular, which when you're reading off of this list would make it very difficult. And the thing about this list is that they were basically going in sequential order. So they were picking like the 2024 pick, the 2023 pick, the 2022 pick for the awards. It's a bunch of different awards and it's 8 books per award. And again, they pick based on when they won the title. And because of that, there is overlap. Spoiler alert, James won a bunch of awards. And so it is on this list so many times. And like James, we've seen it on so many of these Goodreads lists. It's something I want to read. It's something I'm interested in, but I can't imagine like you've already read it for one of these challenges and you can't count it again. You're not going to reread it maybe at this point because it is fairly new. Like why does it have to keep getting included? We're never going to see another new book on this list. Before we get too far into it, let's just cover the article. So catch up on recent award-winning fiction. So there are a lot of ways to sort and select books when you're lining up your next reading project. You can go with a favorite author or a trusted micro-genre, a personal recommendation or a book club selection, or even by surpassing cool cover art illustrations. But for real quality control, you want to stick with the winners. That's the idea behind this collection in which we've selected recent winners from across a variety of major book awards. A few notes for this particular collection: we are concentrating on novels rather than nonfiction or short story collections. That's not true. There were many short story collections included in this. They just slipped past your nose. And we've included general literary awards, the Booker Prize, the Pulitzer Prize, along with several genre-specific prizes such as the Hugo Science Fiction, the Edgar Mysteries, and the Bram Stoker Award. Click around below and you'll note that several recent books have collected multiple awards, including Percival Everett James and Margaret Atwood's The Testaments, and Hernan Diaz Trust, and Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys. You'll also find that several authors whose books have broken out into the wide world cultural conversation: Kazuo Ishiguro, Olga Tokar-Kultz, R.F. Kuang, and Richard Powers, plus occasional soap opera-loving cyborgs. Click the award name headline for more information about each category prize and the cover art image, blah, blah, blah. Add to your digital shelf. So let's get into author breakdown and then we can get into the other stuff I've been kind of discussing. What's really interesting about these awards is because, again, it's a curated list, it's curated by judges, it's curated in some way. We're seeing a list breakdown that is very different than what we've seen so far. So 40 books are by white authors, 27 or 22% is by African American, and then we have a lot of different people represented: Argentinian American, Indigenous, Puerto Rican, Chinese American, Korean American, Chinese Panamanian American, Sri Lankan, South African, Scottish, Nigerian, Indian, Senegalese, Omani, I've never heard of that country before, Libyan, Chinese, Japanese American, Mexican American, Lebanese, Mexican, Iranian American, multiracial American, Syrian American, Uruguayan, Japanese, and then Argentinian. So a lot of people that are mixed race American, but also a lot of people that are from different countries. For nationality, we have 69% American, still very similar to other things that we've seen. There is a lot of people from other countries. With this mid pink tone color, you can see British, Irish, Scottish, Canadian. The light pink, you can see European countries: Polish, Netherlands, Bulgarian, and German. And with the dark pink, you can see people from South America, Asia, and Africa. So while it still isn't a lot, it's a very different percentage than we are seeing in a lot of other lists curated so far. We still have a majority of women authors with 60%, and we have 47 male authors, or 39%, and then one non-binary author. And then for queerness, we had 89 or 74% of books with no queer themes, and then 31 or 25% of books with queer themes. So this is really interesting to see because it's been so vetted, so curated. I feel like these judges, these lists are really trying to find books from other places with other perspectives. We are seeing percentages that are quite different than what we've seen in the past. There is a lot of overlap in this list. James was recommended 6 times because it won that many awards. So if you've been interested in James, great, you have your chance. But if you've already read it, that's like 6 books you can't read. I wonder why at some point they didn't just decide to pick the next book instead of overlapping. There were a lot of books that repeated twice though. The Stone Sky, Network Effect, The Book of Goose, The Great Believers, Improvements, Milkman, Interior Chinatown, Blackouts, and Trust. list. And we're also seeing a lot of repeat authors, Percival Everett's, and then N.K. Jemisin is popular. She won the Hugo Awards 3 times. So again, there's the issue there of like having series on this list and a singular series taking up multiple spots. But there's also a lot of authors that have won multiple awards for different titles. The one being the most notable with 3 books besides N.K. Jemisin, Percival Everett, is going to be Colson Whitehead with 3. For genre, this was very interesting to break down. There was 41% of books were fiction or historical, and 35 was fiction. This is where it got a little foggy for me because I really wanted to see how many books were fiction with a historical basis versus like a fiction contemporary book, but there are a lot of books that take place in 2 timelines, so I based it on Goodreads tags. So if historical fiction was like one of the first 3 tags listed for the book, I considered it to be more of a historical fiction book. I was reading synopses too and kind of deciding on that as well, but if books had like a dual timeline and the historical fiction tag was a lot farther back, I counted it as contemporary, just so that we could really see how many books have this historical fiction element versus just a fiction title. And like historical fiction and fiction, I also wanted to see how many fiction books were technically speculative or fabulous in nature. So those science fictions, those dystopians that are technically categorized as a literary fiction book or in the general fiction section of a bookstore. So with that slightly darker pink color, we can see we had 5 fabulous books and 7 speculative. Fabulous can be meaning it's like fairy tale, it's fantastical in some nature, it's magical realism, whereas speculative is science fiction, futuristic in some way. These darker pink colors, this little quad, almost like a little more than 25% of the reading I would surmise is going to be pure genre picks. So we have 8 horror, 8 mystery thriller, 6 sci-fi, and 10 fantasy. So fantasy, yes, it's more popular than science fiction, but also we're seeing an overlap with what books are counted as more speculative and what are counted as like specifically science fiction. And then I broke it down by awards. So this way we can just see what awards were included. We had Tournament, Pulitzer, National Book, Booker Prize, International Booker, National Book Critics, Goodreads Choice, Andrew Carnegie Medals, Kirkus Prize, Penn Cockner, and Stonewall Reader. And then with these darker colors, these are the genre picks. So Nebula, Hugo, Edgar Awards, and Bram Stoker. So the majority is going to be literary fiction books. The outlier is going to be the Goodreads Choice, which is done by popularity, and the International Booker, which is books in translation. So sometimes for the International Book, it didn't have a winner every year. A lot of those books were older titles that are just getting publications or translations now. So you see a lot of publication outliers because of that award, which gets us into publication. So in the pink, these are going to be all of our new books. The dark pink were 14 of 2024, 14 for 2023, 16 for 2022, 16 for 2021, and 15 for 2020. This makes sense because again, they were picking books that won the award for the last 8 years. There is a little bit of sliding around because sometimes a book that was published the year before will win just because of like where the award cutoff date happens, but for the most part it's pretty consistent. 10 books were from 2019, 18 books were from 2018, 11 books were from 2017, 2 from 2016, 1 from 2015, and 1 from 2024. So the majority are in the last 8 years, with kind of a surge in 2018 for whatever reason. But then we have a couple older titles from 2010 and 2007 because of the International Booker. So yeah, that kind of surmises that challenge. It's an interesting challenge. Again, we got a lot of diversity from it, a lot of different titles, but there was also a lot of overlap, and in some cases limiting what you could choose for the book. And in a lot of ways, it's just kind of an oddball list. It just kind of seems out of nowhere. It just doesn't really fit into their other challenges. For me, that's always interesting because I feel like they're trying to create this specific image, but there is a lot of inconsistency. But this does fit in with their centennial picks of the last round of challenges, of them trying to go back and kind of curate not just this vibe of being a site for the most popular books, but being a site of like literary highbrow acclaim. Like them sticking in the Goodreads Choice Awards with the literary awards is very interesting to me. And if you'll look at the Goodreads Choice Awards, you'll actually see The Midnight Library, My Enemy, which I thought was a fantasy book. Why is it here? Goodreads? Why? So I obviously should have read James for this challenge, but it was not available at my library. So I went with something from Hugo Awards, which is sci-fi fantasy. Picked Nell and Bone because it's available and it's something I've wanted to read. This is by T. Kingfisher. It is my first T. Kingfisher, and I gave it like a 4/3.75 stars. It's a dark-ish fantasy book. To me, it reads almost like a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, and so it's a very interesting play on a lot of those characters and archetypes. There was some world-building stuff I wish that there was more of. I like this book a lot, but I'm not quite sure sure why it won that year. And that's like another big issue, is that a lot of people don't agree with these lists. A lot of people have a lot of pushback for these lists, these curated awards. So for Goodreads to like kind of bring them in is very interesting to me, especially because the Hugo has gotten a lot of flack, especially over last year's winners. So let's move on to our final review. So the final challenge that we're going to look at is Debut Darlings. Collect this achievement when you finish one of these first-time authors. So this, again, is very interesting because there is a little bit of overlap, not necessarily in books, but in theme. We've had the top books of the year, we've had the top 2025 releases, and now we're having the top debut. So even though there's not a lot of overlap in the titles themselves, the themes are kind of getting a little bit repetitive. So for this challenge, this is a curated list. Let's read about them. And this is 70 new 2025 debut novels to discover. So again, it's a smaller list than we've seen in the past. For bookworms of a certain intensity, one of the most rewarding reading experiences is discovering a new favorite author. This collection is designed to help with that noble objective. We've gathered below 70 new debut novels that have arrived in 2025. All of the books here have US publication date between January and early August. You'll find books here from all of the usual genres: contemporary fiction, historical fiction, mystery romance, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, plus several that straddle multiple genres and resist genre altogether. Books about uplifting friendships in Ukraine and downward spirals in the Hamptons, robotic siblings in future Korea, and undercover witches in the World War II occupied France, Detroit in the 1960s, and sentient blobs in love. Click on the book cover image for more details about each title. If you think you found a new author, use the want to read button and place on your blah blah shelf. Okay, so this is just curated by Goodreads. They probably looked at the most popular debuts and picked from there and kind of curated to make the list not so undiverse, but like I don't know what the criteria was for picking these. So for our author's ethnicity, we have 54% white authors, 1 Croatian, and 1 Ukrainian, and the rest are from non-white authors. So we have 9 African American, Vietnamese American, Punjabi Malanese American, Chinese American, Asian American, Korean American, Cuban American, you're going to see a lot of American, Taiwanese American, Singaporean, Palestinian American, Nigerian, Iraqi Pakistani, 2 indigenous, 1 Chinese Canadian, 1 Afghani, 1 Iranian, 1 British Japanese, and 1 Salvadorian. And we have 70% American. And then with that light green teal color, you can see the rest of the English speaking makeup: 8 British, 3 Irish, 3 Canadian, no Australian. Okay. With the slightly darker green, you can see European countries like Sweden, Germany, Ukrainian, and Croatian. And then with the darker, you can see our friends from non-English/European countries, so Nigerian, Singaporean, and Iranian. For our gender, we have a majority of women authors again, with 77%, 15% men, and 1 non-binary. And for queer, we have 19 of the authors identify as LGBT, or their stories are LGBT themes, and 72% or 51 books did not have such representation. So I think this list is interesting. I think it's fun. There's overlap, but there was an opportunity to introduce us to new authors, and it seems like that opportunity allowed not just new authors and new books, but new perspectives to kind of take center stage. So if you're really cherry picking your challenges and which ones you pick, do you have the ability to just pick the challenges that interest you, the challenges that have more diversity? But if you're like me and a completionist, only some of these challenges are going to appeal to you. So let's look at genre. It was a lot of fiction. 31% was fiction, 19 or 27% was historical fiction, and then we have 12 books or 17% was speculative or fabulous. So most of the titles are general or literary fiction picks, and then we only have a couple that are genre fiction picks. So 1 fantasy, 3 horror, and 4 mystery thrillers. No sci-fi, interestingly enough. So there was curation, but not a ton, because I know that there's debut authors in those genres, and literary took precedent. Again, trying to seem highbrow, to trying to seem diverse, not necessarily always doing that, because they are more concerned with their marketing, with their image, than with actually curating a useful list. And Debut Darlings is probably the one I struggled the most with, finding a title that I could read. Even with books that had very low ratings and reviews, they are some of the most popular books to be reading from the library because they are the new releases. So most of these did not have more than 2,000 ratings, 3,000 ratings, because they are new. And so I thought I was going to have such an easy time finding a book to read from the library. But no, there are super long wait lists for a lot of these titles for pretty much everything I was interested in. And I only found 1 title that I could potentially pick up from the library library. And so I haven't read this yet, but I'm going to be reading Blob by Maggie Sue because it was pretty much the only title that I looked up that was available. And so I had to pick that book out of necessity versus actually wanting to read it. And that's where the marketing comes into this. It's pushing these books over and over again. The pushing of popular titles, of getting you excited or feeling FOMO to read these new books, to read these popular books, because it drives you, if not to Amazon, to one of their advertisements, to buying books versus being able to check them out for free from the library. And Kindle, Amazon, it is the most accessible book buying platform. For a lot of people that live outside of America, a lot of these places where books are very expensive, sometimes Amazon is the most accessible platform for buying these books at a cheaper cost. And a lot of times for people that don't have access to a library, are far away from a library, or are again not financially able to buy a lot of books, Amazon Kindle is very, very accommodating and very accessible. So Goodreads is marketing to us, trying to get us to read these books, trying to get us invested in these challenges because it drives engagement towards the Kindle, towards buying books from them. And it's such a double-edged sword because it's like Amazon is the number one place for indie authors to publish. Again, it's super accessible for people that aren't able to normally get books, but they're also like an awful company. Like, we know that. It's not just for all the stuff that they do to their workers and to the environment. We also have to think in terms of publishing. They are really trying to be the biggest publisher, the biggest outsource of books. They started as a book company primarily to shake up the publishing industry, to shake up the book buying industry, and they want to be the number one publisher. Tried to outdo Barnes & Noble with their prices to get people to go to their sites. They have always tried to trample small independent bookstores. And that's why the marketing behind these challenges is so interesting to me, because I don't think they're completely successful yet. They're trying very hard to integrate Kindle with Goodreads, but it's not quite perfect yet. I've seen a lot of people saying how like it actually doesn't overlap as much as you think it would. Some of the challenges are different, and also books are not always available, and that there's a lot of glitching with having your stats go to Goodreads and vice versa. And again, there's a lot of inconsistencies with like the image of Goodreads, what they're trying to rebrand as, especially right now with like the new logo change. We see them are trying to curate this image of them being like the best platform, the most highbrow, literary leaning platform in some ways, while also being like on the pulse of what's trending. They're trying to stay relevant in a world people don't want to use Goodreads anymore, and where people have alternatives for the first time really to Goodreads. But Goodreads is familiar. It's still the most used platform. They have that behind them. And so I don't think they're really worried about retaining people necessarily, but I think they are trying to change up their marketing strategy, to change up how they're perceived in a lot of ways. In my first challenge, I came to the conclusion that these challenges are inconsistent. They're kind of weird. They're kind of random. In my second video, we concluded that Goodreads is trying to sell us something. And in this third challenge, Goodreads is not just trying to sell us something, they're trying to be on our minds. They're trying to be relevant. They're trying to market to us because they want us on their platform. They want us to be buying Kindle, to be buying books from them. They want us to be engaging with ads and advertisements on their platform, to be engaging with these news and interviews on their platform. And with so many ads coming out that are very questionable, I wonder if Goodreads might be the next brand to do so. They've never really had to advertise their website. I don't think Amazon is too worried about trying to advertise themselves. I wouldn't be surprised if something for Kindle came out, or if more changes to the Goodreads platform and to the Kindle platform began to start. As far as the Kindle goes, I don't know that much. Hint, 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 that is going to be a video in the future where I cover the Kindle and really get into it, hopefully before the end of my Goodreads project, so that I can really give you some comparisons and contrasts. But the biggest thing I came away with is that there's a lot of inconsistencies, there's a lot of overlapping, and there definitely is a challenge, a struggle if you want to complete these challenges and you don't want to buy books. If you're using your library, you are going to be at a disadvantage, and you really have to hope that you know what's going on to plan ahead and to be on top of things. And even in that case, you might still have to buy a book. Like for the lightning round challenge, I am buying a book. Luckily, it's something I've been interested in on my TBR, something I think I'm gonna 99% enjoy, but it is forcing me to buy a book. I don't think I have a lot of thoughts to add this time around. I think we've kind of can come to our conclusions of what's going on with Goodreads. I hope to see you in the next round of challenges, because that will give us a year's worth of challenges, and we can kind of come to some conclusions about what this greater project really was and kind of look at the challenges as a whole and kind of what it all looks like. And I'm very excited to see how much overlap there truly was between all of the books that were available to read for these challenges this year. But thank you so much for watching. I would love to know what you thought about the challenges, how you engaged with them, how you don't, how you feel about Goodreads and its marketing strategies. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.